Hello everyone, my name is Michael Gavan. I work for the National Education Union. I'm very pleased to be giving this talk today about education and the law. But I just want to begin by saying to everyone, well done for getting a place at the Institute of Education. It really is the best university in the country in terms of teacher training. So you've done very well getting a place there. And I'm sure you'll be very successful in your studies. And it's a great place to begin your teaching career. So well done to everyone. Now, colleagues, I'm just going to put up a few slides. So just bear with me while I just share the screen. So just hang on for a sec and I'll soon be there. Okay, here we go. And hopefully that's all very clear. Okay, begin by talking about the National Education Union. I don't know what happened there, colleagues. Hopefully it will come back now. We'll get this going. Right, yeah. So what is a trade union? Well, a trade union is an organisation that represents workers in a specific sector, and we offer advice, representation to our members, support them, negotiate pay increases, defend their terms and conditions, try and achieve improvements, and very importantly, give workers a voice in their workplace so they can have a say about how their school is being run. And obviously, the stronger we are, the better we can do for our members, and our strength comes from having more members and making sure they're well supported. So the National Education Union is a very large union. We're the biggest teachers union in Western Europe, almost 500,000 members. And we've got a place in our union for all of you. So we hope you'll all decide to join. While you're at the Institute, membership is absolutely free. And when you become teachers in your early career teaching years of the first and second year, then membership is practically free in the first year and very small fee for the second year. So, yeah, we think it's a good deal and we hope you'll sign up with us. Okay, colleagues, moving on to the main theme of the talk, education, the law and you. Well, you know, the law is really changing in a rapid way for education. There's a schools bill going through Parliament at the moment, quite controversial in many ways. It wants to make every school part of a multi-academy trust. As a union, we don't think that's the best way to go. Doesn't mean we're anti-individual academies, but we certainly don't think that putting every school into a corporate multi-academy trust is the best way forward. Most secondaries at the moment are academies, but many of them aren't in trusts. Many of them are standalone academies and doing quite well. And the others who are maintained schools are also doing well. And when it comes to primary schools, most of those are currently maintained schools. So when it comes to looking at the success rates of the various types of school, there is no evidence that academies do better, and particularly no evidence that multi-academy trusts do better. And we think that's a damaging step in terms of education. So we're trying to campaign to make sure the bill doesn't go through in its current format. And what I'd say to colleagues is watch this space, because there's still a lot to happen in terms of the schools bill. And when it becomes a Schools Act, it will, of course, be very important and have implications for everyone working in every school. So there you go, colleagues, a very live issue at the moment. So the law as it affects education is very important. So do please keep up with the debates and how it's going. And of course, if you become a member of the NEU, we'll make sure that you get fully equipped with all of the news around that. And of course, you can visit our website and use our app for the latest news. Okay, down to where we go now in terms of the statutory framework. I'm going to start by talking about the teacher standards. It's a very straightforward piece of information, but it's important. Every teacher is expected to uphold the teacher standards. And what they basically mean is that you have to maintain an up-to-date knowledge and understanding of and act within the statutory frameworks which set out your professional duties and responsibilities. It basically also means upholding the reputation of teachers in the wider community, standing up for important things like British values, and that means upholding democracy, fairness, and ensuring that the image of teaching is the one that we all want to see, a good image where everyone wants to trust teachers, because it's a profession that has a very high degree of trust, much higher than politicians, for example. I mean, nobody trusts them, but teachers are very highly respected, and it's important that we maintain that respect and support for the wider teaching community. So that's why every teacher is meant to uphold those teacher standards. So it's very easy to look up, straightforward one-page document, but it's important as a guide for how you need to conduct yourselves as teachers in the profession. Okay, what's very important now is the teacher's duty of care to pupils. Always been important, and it's something that every teacher should always ensure is their number one responsibility. Now, these legal responsibilities derive from three main sources. One is the common law duty of care. The next are the various statutory regulations. So, for example, the Children Act 2004, and there are also important documents which form part of the teacher's employment contract. So, for example, the school teacher's pay and conditions document. Again, you can find all of these online, worth having a look at. The STPCD comes out every year, and it's important in terms of what it means for teachers in terms of their working hours and what they're required to do, their holidays, and other important issues like that. You can also look up a document called the Burgundy Book, which sets out various entitlements that teachers have. So again, important pieces of legislation and important agreements too. So do have a look at those. And of course, if you want to get more information on them, our own website at the NEU is a very good source of information about that. Okay, I've talked about the importance of the duty of care because it is so essential that anyone who works in the school, teachers in particular, make sure they do everything they can to maintain the safety and care of the pupils who are in their responsibility and in their school. Now, the current standard of care expected of a teacher is that of a reasonable person in the circumstances of a class teacher. So a teacher's duty of care to individual pupils is influenced by, for example, the subject or activity taught, the age of the children. Clearly, there'll be different responsibilities for primary age children as opposed to secondary age children, the available resources the teacher has, and the size of the class. So all of these are important elements in upholding the common law duty of care. Now, out of school activities, this can be a very valuable part of the profession, and we'd always encourage colleagues to take part in them where they can. But it's important that there's proper levels of care being maintained when it comes to any trips or any out of school events. Now, obviously, as colleagues who are training, you won't be responsible for leading any activities, but when you qualify and become part of the profession, you may well be asked to take part of them. And if you do, it's very important that even if you're not going to lead the trip, because you won't do as a new teacher, but you may do later on in your career, that's important that there's a proper risk assessment carried out and that everyone understands what the risks are of the particular trip, so they ensure that safety is maintained, because safety is paramount. Now, most trips go off without any problems. They're a big success. Everyone enjoys them. Everyone finds them very rewarding and very valuable. But very, very rarely something may go wrong. And if something does happen that shouldn't have done, just want to remind colleagues that there is no legal liability for any injury sustained by a pupil unless there is proven negligence. And what that means is that everything needs to be done that's possible to maintain safety. But as long as you do your job and make sure that you're carrying out what you're meant to do and the risk assessment is be carried out appropriately, then you won't be acting in a negligent way. So please don't worry if you have to go on a trip. Other important points about out of school activities: teachers have responsibility for pupils in their care, but qualified instructors giving guidance to pupils will be responsible for their relevant area of expertise. And if you're concerned about the ability of any of the pupils to undertake any particular activity safely, those pupils should, if necessary, be withdrawn from the activity. So safety comes first. If you don't feel that what the student's been asked to do can be done safely because of their abilities, then take the students out of that activity. And of course, we always underline that teachers should not participate in activities or journeys or visits or trips if they believe they're not being adequately prepared or organised. And any concerns should be raised with the head teacher. And I would suggest most schools, there'll always be an NEU rep, so speak to them before you raise it with the head, and they will help you to try and make sure that the trip is organised in a better and safer way. Now, the Health and Safety at Work Act is something that is very important. It's something that certainly comes to the fore during the recent COVID crisis and the pandemic and all of the problems that COVID has caused. We know that COVID is not at the same devastating level it was, but it's still around as an issue. So that's why it's very important that every school is still monitoring COVID and making sure that every reasonable step is taken to ensure that COVID isn't spreading in their school. So the Health and Safety at Work Act certainly underlined the importance of risk assessments in schools. And we like to see that every school has an open and publicly available risk assessment so everyone can see within the school what is being done to keep everybody safe, and that everyone then knows what their responsibilities are. So please make sure that when you're working in schools, that you know what the risk assessment is for your school. Very important piece of information. Okay, physical contact with pupils. Now, the Department of Education advised it's not illegal to touch a pupil. There are occasions when physical contact with a pupil is proper and necessary. For example, holding the hand of a child and going to assembly. And of course, we talked about trips earlier, going out on a trip with young students, with primary age children, for example, you'll need to hold their hands when crossing the road. And of course, it's also entirely reasonable to touch a child when comforting a distressed pupil or congratulating them or praising them. And of course, in practical lessons, such as learning how to use a musical instrument. So those are the reasons why you can do it. And then, of course, if you're a PE teacher demonstrating exercises, you may need to have physical contact with the student. And if you do volunteer to be a first aider, and of course, if you give first aid, then you will need physical contact with the pupil. Now, when is it reasonable to use force? That should be done in very exceptional circumstances, and it should only be done by teachers who are particularly trained to undertake the use of restraint in circumstances. Now, it is reasonable to use reasonable force to prevent pupils from hurting themselves or others, or from committing an offence, or to stop them damaging property, or from causing disorder. That's all allowed legally under the Education and Inspections Act. So there's that legal power there, but it's something that we always advise should be done in very, very limited circumstances. I remember that teachers do not have a duty to intervene. So our advice is, unless you're trained in a particular way on how to restrain children, do not intervene in those circumstances. It's not the responsibility of ordinary rank and file teachers. That's the responsibility of members of the senior leadership team. And teachers should never intervene if they feel they would be putting themselves at risk. And sadly, I've known over the years, colleagues get injured when they have intervened, and then the school won't support them. So again, be very, very careful about intervening, and don't do so if you're going to put yourself at risk. Don't want to exaggerate that as an issue. Rarely becomes a problem, but just be careful when you're out there and when you're developing your career. And of course, I'm sure everyone understands this, it's always unlawful to use force as a form of punishment or discipline. That doesn't happen in schools, and we mustn't allow it to happen ever again. But child abuse. Now, you all have lots of talks about safeguarding, so I won't repeat what other colleagues will say in much more detail than I'm going to say today. But what I would add and underline is that it's very important for teachers to be aware of the safeguarding procedures in their school. Really important that you know them. Every school will run refresher training on that every year, but it's important that you know your own procedures for reporting any concerns about child abuse. Because sometimes if a concern arises, there can be some delays in reporting, and that's never the good way. Any concerns that any teacher sees, they should report right away to their school's designated safeguarding lead. So very important that concerns are reported without delay, because if something is going on with a child, then any delay could put them at harm's way, and it's important that concerns are raised at the earliest opportunity. That must always take priority, colleagues. So when you're out in school, if you see a concern, don't hesitate, report it to the school's designated safeguarding lead. You'll be told who they are, and every school should advertise who they are very clearly. So if you see something that troubles you about a child and you're worried about the child, or a child comes to tell you something, then do make sure you report it without hesitation. Okay. Right, teachers' power to discipline. Teachers have a legal right to impose a penalty for unreasonable behaviour, to confiscate inappropriate items such as mobile phones, but again, follow the school's policy on that. School will have a clear policy around that. Some schools allow for the confiscation, others have different policies about whether even mobiles can be brought into school. So whatever the school policy is, follow that carefully and implement it in the way that other colleagues in the school do. Now, teachers' power to discipline includes disciplining pupils who behave badly on the way to and from school. So the responsibility doesn't just flow from when the children are in school, it also includes their journey to and from the school each day. And part of the discipline can be about imposing detention, but again, the school have a policy about that and conditions will apply. And as I said earlier, there can never be any physical punishment in schools. And that's gone out a long time ago, and quite right too. Okay, protection from discrimination. Pupils are protected under the Equality Act 2010, very important piece of legislation, and that prohibits discrimination against pupils and prospective pupils on the grounds of disability, pregnancy, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, and trans status. And again, protecting against discrimination is a very important responsibility for everybody in the profession. Now, we talk about protected characteristics, and what we mean by that is the ones we've just talked about qualify as protected characteristics, and discrimination law is mainly contained in the Equality Act 2010, as I've just talked about. Now, it's unlawful to directly or indirectly discriminate against a pupil on the grounds of a protected characteristics, so the ones I've just described above. I'll just go back to the previous slide so you can see this again. Disability, pregnancy, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, or trans status. Okay. Now, direct discrimination is where a person is treated less favourably because of their protected characteristic, and direct discrimination can take many forms. It may vary from offensive remarks to subtle differences in assessment, expectation, provision and treatment, and it may be unconscious or even well-intentioned, but whatever the reason for it, it's always unlawful and always something that should be challenged. Now, indirect discrimination is where a school has a provision, criterion or practice which, although applied on the surface equally to everyone, puts people with a particular protected characteristic at a disadvantage and cannot be justified objectively, i.e. on educational or other grounds. Colleagues, I'll give you an example of that. We sometimes come across schools where they say it's a school policy that every teacher must work full-time. They say that for the best interest of the pupils, there can't be any part-time teachers in their school. And when we hear about that, we always challenge it, because sometimes there'll be teachers who need to work part-time because they need to be carers, either for their children or for relatives. And that's why it's important that there's always scope for part-time teaching in the school as well. Now, on the face of it, the school will say, well, we're treating everybody the same. Everyone's been treated equally. We just want all teachers to work full-time. But of course, we can all see how that could end up being discriminatory in practice. So that's an example of how indirect discrimination can, and I'm afraid is a problem in some schools today. Now, the public sector equality duty requires schools to have due regard to the need to, firstly, eliminate discrimination, advance equality of opportunity, and foster good relations. So that's a very important duty, and schools, I think, understand the importance of that, but they don't always fulfill it in the best way they can. So again, that's an important area where we want schools to step up more and do more in terms of promoting equality, because it's a very important part of their responsibilities as important roles in the community. Now, the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice applies to local authorities, head teachers, school governing bodies, parents, trust boards of academies, other local authority services and teachers, and particularly special educational needs coordinators, SENCOs, are required to have regard to the English or Welsh code. Now, the SEN codes emphasise the importance of working with and taking into account the views of parents and pupils, and the need for early identification and assessment of special educational needs. Now, the codes deal with the conditions for the inclusion of pupils within SEN within mainstream schools. And as a union, we're very committed to making sure that every child with special educational needs has a place in a mainstream school. And it's something that we're committed to in supporting inclusive education. We think that's very important, that SEN children are allowed to go to mainstream schools and are then given the resources to thrive in those schools. And of course, in education, resources is a big issue. We're often critical of the government for not giving schools the resources they need. And one of the important roles of the NEU is to make sure we campaign and lobby for schools to get the resources that they need. And that includes for every child. And of course, that also includes children with special educational needs. Okay, now teachers need to be protected from discrimination as well. Of course they do. And teachers have specific protection from discrimination or harassment at work on the grounds of age, disability, marital or civil partnership status, maternity, pregnancy, race, religion or belief, sex, sexual orientation, and gender reassignment or trans status. And also they get protection if they work on a part-time or a fixed subcontract. So you've seen there that lots of those are the same protected characteristics that I spoke earlier of that come from the Equality Act 2010. So I think you can see just how important that piece of legislation is. It really is the bedrock of equality in this country. Now, one of the things that you may have seen is that the government is talking about changing our country's connection with the European Court on Human Rights. And again, they're talking about bringing in a British Bill of Human Rights. And again, this could be an important change of the law, and one I think that we would worry about in terms of diluting the law around equality and also diluting the law around human rights. So again, watch this space, because it's something that the NEU will be taking up and trying to make sure that human rights law and equality law is maintained and isn't weakened in any way. Okay, in terms of unlawful, teachers are protected from direct and indirect discrimination, victimisation and harassment, and it's unlawful for employers to discriminate in recruitment or selection procedures, to discipline or dismiss employees for discriminatory reasons, or to treat employees in ways that amount to direct or indirect discrimination. And as a union, we champion equality very strongly and will always challenge unlawful practices by employers, and that includes schools and colleges. Okay, criminal records. Well, this isn't going to worry many of you, so don't worry about that. But it is important that when schools employ teachers, that they have absolute confidence that there is no criminal record in their past. So that's why every teacher has to give a DBS enhanced disclosure. The Rehabilitation of Offenders Act does not apply to teachers, and it's important that colleagues understand that if there is any criminal issues involved, it must always be disclosed. But again, I don't want to particularly worry any of you about that. Having said that, just talk about childcare disqualifications. So you know that the childcare disqualification arrangements are set out in the Childcare Act 2006 and the Childcare Disqualification Regulations 2009. They do automatically disqualify a person from providing childcare, and that includes teaching early years in the foundation stage at the point they are convicted of or cautioned for specified offences, where they meet other disqualification criteria set out in the regulations. Now, the union has produced guidance about that, so again, don't worry about it, but it's just something that's useful to know. Okay, well, that's just a quick run through of all the major legal issues affecting teachers and colleagues out in schools. So we hope that's helpful. And do please come back to the NEU if you need any more advice about anything. We've got a very good helpline and a very good app as well. So just a quick summary there of the type of help that we can give you. And please use us when you're out on your training. Of course, you'll get excellent advice from your tutors as well. But once you become a member of the NEU, you'll also have access to our advice resources, and we're very happy to share them with you. Also got a very good app, so please use that. You can get it from the App Store or Google Play, so pop it on your phones, and it's a very good source of advice and will be particularly useful in your training period. And then very lastly for you, it's, as I said earlier, it's free as a student, and I hope you'll take it up with us. It's a no-brainer really in terms of joining. So please do fill in the form and come and join us. And lastly, wish you all the very best with your career, and I'm sure you'll have a very good time on your training. So colleagues, that's the end of our talk for today, and I hope everything goes well for you in the future. Good luck for the rest of the term and the academic year, and I hope to see you again sometime. Okay, all the very best. Bye-bye.